Tobiah Fletcher stood on the porch of his shack, a ghost in the New Mexico sun. The black coffee in his tin cup was the only thing with any warmth. At 43, he was a mountain of a man, built of old grief and hard muscle. He'd come to this lonely stretch of Willow Creek to be left alone, to let the silence swallow what was left of him after the war, after the fever took his wife and child. Major Tobiah Fletcher of the 2nd Colorado Cavalry was dead. Only this man remained, a hermit waiting for his own time to come. But the high desert wasn't done with him yet. Downstream, a rider was coming. Tobiah didn't get visitors, ever. The man on the black mare was Doc Henley, the only person in the town of Musket Bend who knew the look of a battlefield surgeon, because he'd been one himself. And a man like that never paid a social call. "Morning, Tobiah," the doctor said, his eyes scanning the quiet cabin. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion." Tobiah just nodded. "Coffee's fresh." The doctor took the cup but didn't relax. He stood by the window looking out at the creek. "Peaceful place you've got here," he said. "It suits me." Tobiah waited. The silence stretched. Finally, Doc Henley turned. "I'm wondering if you heard anything unusual last night, or saw anything out of the ordinary." Tobiah's pale blue eyes sharpened. "What kind of unusual?" The doctor's voice dropped low. "The kind that might involve someone getting hurt. Badly hurt." He told a story about a nervous traveler who'd come to him before dawn. A man who'd been riding through the canyons and heard screaming. A child screaming. Then a sudden terrible silence. "Where did he hear this?" Tobiah's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Up near Devil's Ledge," Henley said. "You know the place. Those cliffs, maybe 2 miles upstream." He paused, and the next words landed like stones. He said it was a little girl's voice. Tobiah knew Devil's Ledge, a 60-foot drop to the rocks and the deep, cold water below, a place where a child's scream could be swallowed by the wind. "Did this visitor tell Marshal Brennan?" "That's the thing," Doc said. "He rode out before dawn, didn't talk to anyone else. The marshal's in Santa Fe for the week." So the doctor had come to him, to the hermit, the ghost. "You know this creek better than anyone," Henley pressed. "And if there is a hurt child out there, time matters. You strike me as a man who wouldn't let a child suffer." He was right. It was the one part of the old major that Tobiah couldn't kill. "I'll take a look," he said, his voice like gravel. "I'll come with you." "No need. I'll find it faster alone." Tobiah was already moving, grabbing a coil of rope and the medical kit he hadn't touched in years. If there was something to find, he'd find it. But as he walked along the creek bank, his boots silent on the sand, a cold dread settled in his gut. He'd seen enough death to last a dozen lifetimes. He didn't want to find another body, especially not a child's. Devil's Ledge loomed ahead, a fist of red rock against the morning sky. His eyes weren't on the cliff. They were on the deep pool of water below it. And that's when he saw her. From 50 yards away, it looked like a bundle of rags caught on the rocks at the edge of the water. But as he got closer, the horror took shape. A child. Face down in the shallows, long dark hair spread out in the current like a black fan. A torn blue dress, stained with mud and something darker. Tobiah didn't hesitate. He plunged into the icy creek, the shock of the cold nothing compared to the shock of what he was seeing. He lifted her small body, his massive hands impossibly gentle. He turned her over. She was breathing, barely. A pulse, weak but there. But her body was a road map of pure evil. A deep gash on her forehead, bruises on her arms, her ribs, and around her throat, a perfect, clear pattern of adult fingers. Someone had tried to strangle this little girl, and then they'd thrown her off a 60-foot cliff to finish the job. But they had failed. She was alive. And now she was his responsibility. He wrapped her in his jacket and started the long walk back to his cabin, his mind racing. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder. Whoever did this thought she was dead, lying at the bottom of Willow Creek. And that ignorance was the only thing keeping her safe. By the time he reached his shack, she was stirring, making small, pained noises that felt like bullets in his chest. He kicked the door open, laid her on his bed, and went to work. His hands, trained in the bloody chaos of field hospitals, moved with a steady, competent rhythm. He cleaned her wounds, built up the fire, and set water to heat. As he gently washed the gash on her forehead, her eyes fluttered open. They were huge and brown, filled with a terror so deep it seemed ancient. She looked at him, at the strange giant with the sad eyes, and didn't make a sound. But he saw the awareness in her gaze, the understanding of a betrayal so profound no child should ever know it. "You're safe now," he said, his voice quiet, a rumble in the silent cabin. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." She didn't answer. She just watched him. And Tobiah Fletcher, the man who had come to the desert to die, realized he had just been given a reason to live. The little girl slept through the afternoon, a small, broken thing lost in his big bed. Tobiah sat in his chair, watching her, the silence of his cabin now filled with her shallow breaths. The bruises on her neck were a testament to a cruelty he couldn't comprehend. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the canyon, her eyes opened again. She was more aware this time, her gaze taking in the rough log walls, the stone fireplace, him. "Are you thirsty?" he asked. She gave a tiny, hesitant nod. He brought her water in his cup, holding it steady for her. Her hands were so small. "My name is Tobiah," he said when she was done. "What's yours?" She just looked at him, then turned her face to the wall. "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to talk." An hour later, Doc Henley returned. Tobiah met him on the porch. "You found someone," the doctor said. It wasn't a question. "Little girl." Tobiah's voice was grim. "Maybe 6 years old. Someone tried to kill her." Doc Henley's face went white. "Dear God, how bad?" "She's tough. But Doc, there are finger marks around her throat." The doctor closed his eyes for a moment, then opened his medical bag. Inside, the child watched them approach with those old, wary eyes. She let Doc Henley examine her, flinching only when he gently touched her bruised neck. "Professional work on the wound care," the doctor murmured to Tobiah. "You haven't lost your touch." Outside, they spoke in low voices. "This is attempted murder, Tobiah. The authorities have to be told." "And then what?" Tobiah shot back. "She goes to an orphanage? Gets lost in the system? Whoever did this is still out there, Doc. What if they find out she's alive? What if they try again? You can't just keep her here." "Right now?" Tobiah's voice was hard as stone. "This is the safest place in the world for her. Whoever threw her off that cliff thinks she's dead. Let's keep it that way." Doc Henley studied the big man's face, seeing a resolve he hadn't seen since the war. "All right," he said finally. "I'll bring supplies. But be careful, Tobiah. You're playing a dangerous game." After the doctor left, Tobiah heated some beans. The little girl ate slowly, cautiously. "That dress you were wearing," he said gently. "A pretty blue, with little flowers on it." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain. Memory. "Someone who cared about you picked out that dress," he said. Her little lip trembled. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But I want you to know. Whoever hurt you, they can't reach you here." She finished her meal and laid back down, closing her eyes. But he knew she wasn't sleeping. She was listening, judging. The next morning brought another visitor. Tobiah was splitting wood when he heard the hoofbeats. This wasn't Doc Henley. This was a heavy-set man on a fine horse, dressed in town clothes that looked out of place in the wilderness. "Morning," the man called out, dismounting with an easy confidence. "Name's Otto Kellerman. I own the general store in Musket Bend." Tobiah just nodded, his hand resting on the axe handle. "It's not what you can do for me," Kellerman said with a smile that didn't touch his cold eyes. "It's what I might be able to do for you. I hear tell you might have found something along the creek yesterday, something that belongs to someone else." The casual words were laced with poison. "Not sure I follow," Tobiah said. "Oh, I think you do." Kellerman's smile widened. "See, there are powerful folks in this territory. Folks who don't like their property being interfered with. I'm sure you're a reasonable man, Mr. Fletcher. Reasonable enough to understand that sometimes the best thing to do is mind your own business." Tobiah took a step forward. Kellerman instinctively took a step back. "What property would that be?" Tobiah asked, his voice a low growl. "Point is," Kellerman stammered, his confidence cracking, "if something was found, the Christian thing to do would be to return it. No questions asked." "And if I don't see it that way?" "Then you might find yourself with more trouble than you can handle, friend." Tobiah let the silence hang for a moment. Then he smiled, a cold, sharp thing that made the storekeeper flinch. "You tell whoever sent you they're welcome to come discuss their property claim with me. Personally." Kellerman scrambled onto his horse. "You're making a mistake, Fletcher. Wouldn't be my first." After he was gone, Tobiah stood in the yard, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't random. This was connected. Powerful people were looking for this child. He went inside. The little girl was sitting up on the bed, her eyes wide with fear. She'd heard it all. "Are you afraid of those people?" he asked. She nodded, a quick, jerky motion. Tobiah knelt by the bed, meeting her gaze. "Well, I'm not," he said simply. "And as long as you're with me, you don't need to be afraid of them either." For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. She reached out a tiny hand and touched his arm. Just for a second. Then she whispered a single word. "Mercy." Tobiah smiled, a real smile this time. "Hello, Mercy," he said. "It's nice to meet you." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the peaks. But inside the cabin, a fragile bond was forming between a broken man and a wounded child. He now knew her name, and he knew that the men who were hunting her would show none. Their life fell into a quiet rhythm. Tobiah had never raised a child, but he knew what Mercy needed: routine, safety, time. He taught her how to gather eggs, how to read the weather in the clouds. She rarely spoke, but he could feel her watching him, learning, starting to trust. One afternoon, he saw how she clutched her blankets for comfort. That night, by the fire, he took scraps of an old blue shirt and worn work pants and began to sew. His hands were clumsy with the needle and thread. The result was a lumpy, uneven doll with mismatched button eyes and hair made of unraveled rope. But when he gave it to her the next morning, her face lit up. She took the doll and held it to her chest like it was a priceless treasure. "She needs a name," he said gently. Mercy thought for a long moment. "Hope," she whispered. From then on, Hope the doll was her constant companion. Tobiah would hear her whispering to it, telling it secrets she couldn't yet tell him. But the outside world wouldn't leave them alone. Doc Henley kept visiting, bringing supplies and news from town. "Otto Kellerman's been asking questions," he said one day. "Quiet questions, about missing children." Tobiah's jaw tightened. "There's also been talk about a man named Virgil Kemp," the doctor added. The name was like a foul smoke in the air. Tobiah had heard it whispered in town. A name that meant power and fear. "What about him?" "He's been buying up land," Doc explained. "And when folks don't want to sell, accidents happen. Fires, sick cattle, the kind of bad luck that changes a man's mind." The doctor looked towards Mercy, sitting on the porch with her doll. You think he's connected to what happened to her? I think Virgil Kemp is connected to most of the bad business in this territory, the doctor said. Be careful, Tobiah. This isn't just about a little girl anymore. It's about power and money, the kind of stakes men kill for. That night, Tobiah watched Mercy play in the fading light. Her small voice, asking questions about the mountains and the stars, was slowly filling the empty spaces in his soul. But he knew a storm was coming. Kellerman's visit was a warning. Doc's news was a confirmation. Mercy wasn't just a victim. She was a threat to someone powerful. He made a decision. Tomorrow, he would go into Musket Bend. He would listen. He would learn. He was done hiding. Later, as he tucked her into bed, she watched him turn down the lamp. Tobiah? She said softly. Yes? Are you going to stay here with me? The question, so small and so full of fear, pierced him. The fear of being abandoned again. I'm not going anywhere, he said, his voice firm. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. She closed her eyes, but he knew she was listening as he settled into his chair by the fire. He always slept there now, a guardian between her and the door. A man who had given up on family was learning how to be a father. A little girl who had lost everything was starting to find hope. And the doll with the button eyes watched over them both in the flickering firelight. The change started in the dark. Tobiah woke to whimpering from the bed. Another nightmare. He went to her side, ready to wake her gently. But this time, as he touched her shoulder, she spoke a single clear word into the darkness. Mama. Her eyes flew open, wild with loss. When she saw his face, she crumpled. She's gone, Mercy whispered. Mama's gone. I know, he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Tell me about her. And the story poured out of her. Her mother was beautiful and smelled like wildflowers. She sang songs in Spanish. She made the pretty blue dress with the flowers on it, stitching late into the night. Then she got sick, a cough that never went away. And Papa? Mercy's voice broke. She told him how her father, a man named Virgil Kemp, had changed. How his grief had twisted into a terrible, violent rage. And how that rage had found its target in a little girl who looked just like her dead mother. He said it was my fault she died, Mercy whispered, clutching hope to her chest. He said I was bad luck, a curse. She told him about the bruises, the nights spent hiding in the root cellar while her father smashed the house to pieces, until the final night. He said the world would be better off without me. Tobiah felt a cold fury settle deep in his bones. He had seen the evil men do in war. But this was a different kind of monster. Look at me, Mercy, he said, his voice gentle but firm. None of that was your fault. Not the sickness, not his anger. You were just a little girl. He failed you. That doesn't make you a curse. It makes you a brave, good girl who deserves so much better. She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his. Then, slowly, she nodded. From that night on, the words flowed. She asked about the books on his shelf, about the world beyond their creek. He began reading to her from his late wife's Bible. Her favorite story was of David, the shepherd boy who faced a giant with nothing but a stone and courage. Tobiah understood why. He made his trip into Musket Bend, a wolf scouting the hunter's camp. He sat in the saloon, listening. What he learned chilled him to the bone. Virgil Kemp's power was absolute. He owned ranches, held mortgages, and commanded a private army of gunmen. People were terrified of him. Lost his wife a couple years back. The town blacksmith told him over a whiskey. Turned him mean. Word is he had a little girl, too. Died in some kind of accident. Tobiah kept his face a mask. What kind of accident? Fell off Devil's Ledge, so they say. Tragic. The blacksmith lowered his voice. Though some wonder if it was an accident at all. So that was Kemp's story. Mercy was dead. The secret of her survival was their only shield. But it also meant Virgil Kemp was free. A monster walking in the daylight, building an empire on fear. That night, Tobias sat by the fire, his wife's Bible open in his lap. Rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Virgil Kemp thought he had buried his last secret at the bottom of Willow Creek. He was wrong. And Tobiah Fletcher would spend every day making Mercy strong enough to one day face the man who tried to destroy her. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was her weapon. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet healing. The broken child was gone. In her place was a sturdy 8-year-old with a quick mind and a slow smile. Mercy could read, cook, and mend. She could laugh. The sound filled the empty cabin like sunlight. Tobiah found he was no longer a hermit by choice. The solitude he once craved now felt empty without her. Then one spring morning, a new rider appeared on their path. A woman. Tobiah's hand went instantly to the rifle leaning against the garden fence as he moved to stand in front of Mercy. "Morning," she called out. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm Patricia Whitfield, from the Broken Arrow Ranch." Tobiah knew the name. A widow who ran her own spread, tough and respected. She dismounted with a confident grace, her hazel eyes kind but direct. "Please, call me Patricia," she said, smiling at Mercy, who peeked out from behind Tobiah's legs. "I've heard wonderful things about you from Doc Henley." She reached into her saddlebag. "I brought you something." It was a small, paper-wrapped package. Mercy looked at Tobiah. He nodded. Inside was a beautiful silver locket on a thin chain. "That's my mother," Patricia explained gently, pointing to the tiny photograph inside. "She died when I was about your age. I thought you might like to have something pretty to remember the people you love." Mercy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't have a picture of my mama." "You don't need one," Patricia said softly, touching her own heart. "The important memories live in here." Tobiah watched, a strange mix of gratitude and suspicion churning inside him. This woman's kindness was real, but their world was small and safe, and he feared anything that might change that. "We don't get many visitors," he said, his voice flat. "I understand." Patricia met his gaze directly. "I just thought Mercy might benefit from seeing other ways of living. Perhaps she could visit my ranch sometime, meet my boys." The thought of sharing Mercy, of another woman offering her things he couldn't, sent a surprising pang of jealousy through him. But he saw the look on Mercy's face as she fastened the locket around her neck. He saw her need. "Perhaps," he said, the word costing him more than he expected. That night, Mercy asked him questions he couldn't answer. "Why don't you have a wife, like other men do?" "I had a wife once," he said. "She's gone." "But you're not alone anymore," she said with perfect 8-year-old logic. "You have me." He smiled, a sad, tired smile. "Patricia is pretty," Mercy said. "Do you think she's lonely too?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He had noticed Patricia's strength, her grace. He had also noticed she was alone. That night, as Mercy slept with the new locket clutched in her hand, Tobiah sat awake by the fire. He had been so focused on keeping Mercy safe, he hadn't thought about helping her live. Patricia Whitfield represented a world beyond their isolated creek. A world of other women, other families, other possibilities. And with that world came risks he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The silver locket on the table caught the moonlight, a reminder that love didn't have to be a fortress. Sometimes it had to be a bridge. Patricia's visits became a regular thing. She'd ride over with fresh bread or news from town, but her real gift was teaching Mercy the things a father couldn't. How to braid her hair, how to move with a quiet strength that was uniquely female. Tobiah found himself looking forward to her visits too. He and Patricia would talk for hours, two lonely souls who understood loss. But Mercy watched them. One evening, Patricia was helping Mercy with her needlework. Their heads were close together in the lamplight. "My mama used to sew with me like this," Mercy said suddenly, her voice sharp with a strange new emotion. "I'm sure she did," Patricia replied gently. "She was the most beautiful lady in the whole territory," Mercy declared, her tone a challenge. "She was the best mama anyone could ever have. Nobody could ever replace her." The words hung in the air. Tobiah knew what this was. A child drawing a line in the sand, protecting her territory. "Of course no one could replace her," Patricia said calmly. "But that doesn't mean there isn't room in a person's heart for other kinds of love." "What do you mean?" Mercy asked, her eyes narrowed. "Well, you love Tobiah, don't you? But that doesn't mean you love your mama any less." "That's different. Tobiah saved me. He's like my papa now." "And what if he wanted to have other people in his life?" Patricia asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Someone who cared about both of you?" Mercy's eyes flew to Tobiah's face, wide with a sudden, terrible fear. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" The raw terror in her voice cut him to the quick. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce. "I will never, ever leave you. You are my daughter in every way that matters. Nothing will ever change that. Do you understand?" She searched his face, then nodded slowly. "But what if you want to marry her? What happens to me?" It was Patricia who answered. "Then you'd have a family that was even bigger. A papa who loves you, and someone else who cares about you too." "Like a mama?" Mercy's voice was a whisper. "Like whatever you wanted me to be," Patricia said. "I could never replace your real mama. I would be your friend." Over the next few weeks, Mercy tested them. She watched their every interaction. The turning point came during a thunderstorm. Patricia was trapped at their cabin for the night. Mercy woke from the thunder and came out to find them sitting by the fire. But they weren't whispering secrets. They were talking about her education, her future, how best to help her grow. She wasn't being excluded. She was the center of their world. Patricia put an arm around her, and Tobiah pulled her into his chair. In the circle of their warmth, she understood. Love didn't shrink when it was shared. It grew. Later that night, after Patricia had gone home, Mercy made an announcement. "I think Patricia should come live with us." Tobiah looked at her surprised. "And why is that?" "Because she's lonely," Mercy said. "And because you smile different when she's here, like you used to, before you got sad about your other family." The observation, so wise and kind, hit him like a physical blow. His broken little girl had learned how to heal others. He knew she was right. Patricia had become essential. But he also knew their peace was fragile. Hidden in his old wooden box, oiled and ready, was his gun belt. A silent reminder that the family they were building was founded on a secret. And secrets have a way of coming back to haunt you. The storm finally broke on a crisp autumn morning. Tobiah was splitting wood when he heard them coming. Multiple horses, riding with a purpose that meant trouble. It wasn't Doc. It wasn't Patricia. He moved behind the woodshed, watching. 5 men, all of them hard cases, armed to the teeth. And leading them was a tall man with dead, icy eyes that Tobiah recognized from descriptions in town. Virgil Kemp. "Mercy," Tobiah called quietly. "Inside. Now." She saw his face and disappeared without a word, taking her practiced position behind a heavy wooden chest. Kemp dismounted, his expensive clothes a strange sight against the rugged landscape. He moved with the arrogance of a king. "Mr. Fletcher," he called out, his voice smooth as poison. "Virgil Kemp, I believe we have some business to discuss." Tobias stepped into the open, a mountain of a man blocking the path to the cabin. Don't recall having business with you. Oh, but you do! Kemp's smile was a cold slash. It seems my dear departed daughter might not be as departed as everyone believed. The words were a punch to the gut, but Tobias' face remained a stone mask. I wouldn't know anything about that. Wouldn't you? Kemp gestured, and one of his men brought forward a leather satchel full of documents. I've been doing some research, Kemp said. Fascinating stuff. It seems this little piece of land you're squatting on was originally owned by my late wife, Elena, which means when she died, it should have passed to her heir. Tobias felt the ground shift beneath him. Of course, Kemp continued, his eyes glittering. Everyone believed little Mercedes was dead too. Tragic accident. But if she were alive, well, she'd be the rightful owner of some very valuable real estate, and the water rights that come with it. Mercedes, her full name, a name Tobias had never known. You see my predicament, Kemp said. If my daughter is dead, this land reverts to me. But if she's alive, if someone has been hiding her, well, that creates all sorts of legal complications. His voice hardened. I know you have her, Fletcher. My sources are quite reliable. Now, are you going to return my property to me peacefully, or does this get unpleasant? Your property? Tobias' voice was a low rumble. My daughter, my land, it all belongs to me. Kemp stepped closer, the smell of whiskey on his breath. You've been harboring a runaway, Fletcher. That's kidnapping. And in some circles, Tobias said quietly, trying to murder your own child is called something else entirely. Kemp's civilized mask shattered, his face flushed with rage, his hand dropping to his gun. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Tobias' voice was pure ice. A coward who hurts women and children. She killed her mother, Kemp screamed, his composure gone. Elena got sick caring for that cursed child. She was a plague on my house. He caught himself, but it was too late. The admission hung in the air, witnessed by his own men. Kemp tried to recover. Regardless, the legal facts remain. That child is my daughter. This land is my property. You can return both, or my men and I will take them. And if I refuse? Kemp's cold smile returned. Then you'll discover that accidents can happen to anyone. Fires spread quickly in this dry country. It was a fatal mistake. He had shown his hand, showed that this was never about being a father. It was about greed, and silencing the one person who knew his darkest secret. You have until tomorrow at sunset, Kemp announced, climbing back on his horse. After that, I stop asking politely. As they rode away, Tobias stood in the dust, the world spinning. The land he lived on, the creek that was his sanctuary, the home he had built. It all belonged to Mercy. He went inside. She was huddled behind the chest, pale but calm. She had heard every word. That was him, she said. My father. Yes. He wants to kill me again. He's not going to get the chance. Tobias knelt beside her. What are we going to do? Tobias thought of the papers in his old wooden box, his military records, the story of Major Tobias Fletcher. Then he looked at the brave girl before him. We're going to fight. That evening, as they prepared for war, Mercy made a discovery that changed everything. She was helping him sort his papers when a small envelope fell from behind the chest. Inside was an old, brittle document, a marriage certificate, but the names weren't his. They were Elena Santos and Miguel Santos. Dated 1851. Mercy held it to the light. Tobias, she said slowly, her voice trembling with the enormity of what she was holding. I don't think my mama was ever really married to Virgil Kemp. The implication hit Tobias like a lightning strike. If Elena was never Kemp's wife, then he had no claim to her, or her land, or her daughter. Mercy wasn't just the rightful heir. She was the sole owner, and Virgil Kemp wasn't her father. He was just a monster, a liar, and a murderer, and now they could prove it. Dawn broke cold and gray. The air tasted of metal and coming rain. Tobiah was on the porch, his coffee untouched, the old wooden box open on his lap. Inside, beneath the faded letters and the photograph of his wife, lay the artifacts of his other life. His discharge papers, commendation letters, and a tarnished piece of metal on a faded ribbon, the Congressional Medal of Honor. The citation spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity when Major Fletcher led a cavalry charge that saved 2 companies of Union infantry. It was proof that Tobiah Fletcher was not a simple hermit. He was a commander, a strategist, a man who knew how to fight and win against impossible odds. "You were a hero," a soft voice said from the doorway. Mercy stood there, Hope the doll clutched in her arms. At 12, she was no longer a little girl, but a young woman with a fire in her eyes. "I was a soldier," he corrected gently. She came and sat beside him. "Are we going to fight them?" "We're going to do whatever it takes." He showed her the marriage certificate again. "This changes everything. You're not his daughter. He has no claim on you, or this land." "But he has guns," she said, her voice steady. "He doesn't care about paper." "No, he doesn't," Tobiah agreed, "which is why we need allies." An hour later, Patricia arrived. With her were 2 of her ranch hands, Jim and Carlos, weathered cowboys with the quiet competence of men who had seen trouble before. They gathered around the kitchen table, studying a map Tobiah had drawn. "He's got at least 20 professional gunmen on his payroll," Tobiah explained. "And we have 4 men, 1 woman, and a 12-year-old girl," Jim observed dryly. "Numbers aren't everything," Tobiah said. "This is our ground, and we're fighting for something that matters." He spread out another map, a survey map. It showed that Mercy's land included the water rights to a massive stretch of Willow Creek. "This is what Kemp really wants," Tobiah explained. "Control of this water. With it, he can bankrupt every rancher in this valley." "So we're not just fighting for Mercy?" Patricia realized. "We're fighting for everyone." They spent the next few hours planning their defense. The cabin was a natural fortress, with cliffs at its back and a clear field of fire in front. "The key is to make it too costly for him," Tobiah said, his mind shifting back into the familiar tactics of war. "He's a businessman. If we inflict enough casualties, he might back down." Doc Henley arrived at midday with medical supplies and news. "Word is spreading in town," he said. "Kemp's men are saying you've kidnapped his daughter. They're painting you as the villain." "Let them," Tobiah said grimly. "When this is over, the truth will come out." As the sun began to set, they made their final preparations. Ammunition was distributed. Positions were set. Tobiah gave Mercy her final instructions. "If I tell you to run, you go to the cave. Stay there for 3 days. If we don't come, you get to the marshal." He handed her a leather pouch with all the legal documents. "These papers are your future, Mercy. They're more important than any weapon." "I don't want to leave you," she said, her eyes pleading. "Sometimes the bravest thing to do," he said, "is live to fight another day." They took their positions as the sky turned to copper and gold. But Kemp didn't attack. Instead, through his field glasses, Tobiah saw them moving in the rocks, surrounding the cabin. "Siege tactics," he muttered. "He's going to try and starve us out." It was a smart move. He had the men and the supplies. But Tobiah had been in sieges before. He knew that every hour they held out was another hour for the law to arrive. As darkness fell, he looked at the medal lying on the table, its metal catching the lamplight. 7 years ago, he'd come here to be alone. Now he was surrounded by a family, a daughter worth dying for, a woman worth living for, a cause worth the fight. Somewhere in the darkness, 20 armed men waited for the order to kill them all. But inside the cabin, Major Tobiah Fletcher was preparing for his final campaign. The battle for Willow Creek was about to begin. The first rifle shot cracked through the dawn air. The siege had begun. "Stay down!" Tobiah yelled to Mercy, who was already behind the heavy chest. Around the property, his small force returned fire with disciplined precision. But Kemp was being cautious. His men were firing from long range, keeping them pinned down, testing their defenses. "Fletcher!" Kemp's voice echoed across the canyon. "Send out the girl, and this can all be over." Tobiah didn't answer. He just marked another muzzle flash on his mental map. The morning dragged on, a deadly chess match of sporadic gunfire. Then, around noon, everything changed. "Tobiah!" Mercy called from her lookout position at the back window. "Riders! Coming from the south! A lot of them!" He rushed to her side, raising his field glasses. A column of at least 15 men, riding hard. And at their head, a man with a silver star on his chest. Marshal Tom Brennan. "Seems word reached the right people," Doc Henley said with a grim smile. The effect on Kemp's men was instant. The shooting stopped. Through his glasses, Tobiah could see them arguing, calculating their new, very poor odds. Marshal Brennan rode forward under a white flag. "Tobiah," he said, his face grim. "Heard you've been having some excitement out here." "Nothing we couldn't handle," Tobiah replied. "Marshal!" Kemp's voice boomed from the ridge. "This is a family matter. That man is harboring my daughter." "I need to see some documentation, Mr. Kemp," Brennan yelled back. What followed was a tense negotiation shouted across the open ground. Kemp produced his papers. Tobiah countered with the marriage certificate and the land grants. But the final blow came from Mercy herself. She stepped onto the porch, brave and defiant, holding up the small gold wedding band that had been wrapped in her mother's marriage certificate. "Marshal Brennan!" she called out, her young voice ringing with impossible strength. "My name is Mercedes Santos, and I want to tell you what really happened the night my father tried to kill me." The words struck Kemp's position like a cannonball. He knew it was over. His lies were unraveling. "She's lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "That man has coached her." "I think we need to hear what the young lady has to say," the marshal interrupted firmly. "In a proper legal setting." It was the moment Tobiah had been fighting for, the triumph of law over violence, but then he saw it through his glasses. Several of Kemp's men weren't surrendering. They were moving into new positions. They were professional killers, and they knew if Mercy testified, they would all hang. They weren't going to let that happen. The law had arrived. But the battle for Mercy's future was not over yet. The world exploded in a hail of gunfire. But it wasn't Kemp's men attacking the marshal. It was Kemp's men attacking the cabin. They had one last, desperate goal: silence the witness. 3 gunmen broke cover, charging from the creek side, trying to get to Mercy. They had underestimated Major Tobiah Fletcher. His rifle spoke once. The first attacker spun into the creek. It spoke again. The second man dropped in the dust. Patricia's rifle cracked from the barn, and the third man went down, his leg shattered. "Mercy! Down!" Tobiah roared as bullets tore through the cabin walls. The marshal's men returned fire, but the orderly negotiation had turned into a chaotic, full-scale gun battle. And through the smoke and confusion, Tobiah saw him. Virgil Kemp. He was no longer hiding. He was advancing on the cabin, a revolver in each hand, his face a mask of pure, unhinged madness. His carefully built world was collapsing, and he was going to take everyone down with him. "Mercedes!" he screamed, bullets kicking up dust at his feet. "You destroyed everything! I should have finished this years ago!" He raised his pistols, aiming for the porch, aiming for his daughter. But he never fired. From the barn, Patricia's rifle fired one, single, perfect shot. Kemp stumbled. He clutched his chest, a look of surprise on his face. Then he fell, his face hitting the dirt of the land he had killed for. The death of their leader broke the rest of the gunmen. They threw down their weapons, their hands shooting into the air. In the sudden ringing silence, Marshal Brennan began shouting orders, securing the prisoners. Tobiah rushed to Mercy. She was huddled behind the chest, Hope the doll in her arms, pale but unharmed. Her eyes were wide, but steady. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," he said, pulling her into an embrace so tight it felt like he was trying to put her broken world back together. "You're safe now. You're finally safe." Patricia appeared in the doorway, her rifle in her hands, her face streaked with dust and relief. She looked at Tobiah, at the battlefield, at the victory they had won. "Well fought, Major Fletcher," she said quietly. As the marshal's men cleaned up the mess, Doc Henley moved among the wounded, friend and foe alike. "This was never just about one piece of land," he said, bandaging a gunman's arm. "Kemp's fear controlled this whole territory. With him gone, a lot of good people can finally breathe again." Marshal Brennan walked up to the porch, touching the brim of his hat to Mercy. "Miss Santos," he said formally, "I'll need you to come to Santa Fe to make a statement. But based on what we've seen here, I don't think there will be any question about your property rights." Mercy looked up at Tobiah, then at Patricia. "Will I have to go alone?" The marshal smiled. "I suspect Mr. Fletcher might have some business in Santa Fe himself. Seems the territory could use a man like him." As the afternoon sun beat down on the aftermath, Tobiah stood on the porch, his home, Mercy's home. The war for her past was over. The war for their future was just beginning. 6 months later, a formal photograph was taken in Musket Ben's new studio. It told a story of healing. Tobiah stood tall in his best suit, his Medal of Honor pinned to his chest, one hand on Mercy's shoulder, the other around Patricia's waist. Patricia, now his wife, radiated a quiet, happy confidence. And between them stood Mercy. At 13, she was poised and strong, her mother's silver locket at her throat and the lumpy doll named Hope in her hands. A bridge between the girl she was and the woman she would become. The photograph captured a moment, but the real story was what you couldn't see. The legal proceedings in Santa Fe had been a landslide. Mercy's testimony had brought down Virgil Kemp's entire corrupt empire. Judges were removed, land was returned, and the water rights Mercy inherited were put into a community trust, ensuring fairness for the whole valley. Tobiah had accepted the position of territorial marshal, bringing law to a land that had only known fear. Patricia had started a school, with Mercy as her star pupil and assistant. Their 2 ranches were combined, their 2 families joined. Patricia's sons had a new father, and Mercy had the brothers she never knew she needed. The man who came to the desert to be with his ghosts had found a new family to live for. The girl who was thrown away like trash had inherited a legacy of strength and justice. The portrait would hang on their wall for decades, a testament that families can be forged in fire, and love can grow in the hardest ground. In the years to come, Mercy's children would ask their grandfather to tell stories of the war. Not of the battles, but of the moments of kindness, of soldiers sharing their last piece of bread. Stories that taught them that the same hands that can fight can also heal. That strength and gentleness are 2 sides of the same coin. The little doll named Hope would be passed down, a symbol of how courage can turn the most broken beginning into something beautiful. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the strongest bonds, and the darkest nights are followed by the brightest dawns. If you enjoyed this story and believe that justice is always worth fighting for, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.